Welcome to the Culture Think Tank, where we discuss the trends and analytics of culture facing us today. Our goal is to help provide insights and best practices organizations and leaders can use to strengthen their cultures during today's new normal. I'm Will Lindstrom, and with me here is my partner, Delise Crimmins. Good morning, Delise.
Good morning, Will. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
This week, we've been discussing the challenges organizations face when transitioning people to a work-from-home environment. And we've had the opportunity to speak with a number of CEOs and members of the general workforce. I think my biggest takeaway is how common the challenges are.
I agree, Will. Everyone we've spoken to this week has some common themes, and then they also have some insights that we haven't heard. So things that we might not have even thought about. The things that we've heard that have been most poignant to me have been, number one is helping people set up an effective workstation, because as we mentioned, this isn't sending people home for a day. This is sending them home for an extended period of time. So what that workstation looks like. Leaders really needing to rethink the traditional 8 to 5. And I think that's going to be a tough transition. I don't think that's going to happen overnight. Knowing when to leave people alone and when to engage them is a difficulty that I think each leader is going to have to work with their employees, with their staff members to figure out how that's going to work well in each environment. Managers and non-managers needing help knowing when the workday ends. And we think sometimes about sending people away remotely, and we worry often about non-performance, and that's an issue. How do we manage that? I also worry about those high performers, because in my world, I understand that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So those people who perform highly in their work environment will likely take that same energy and vigor into their home environment, and they sometimes have a hard time knowing when to stop. So helping them know when the workday actually ends. Focusing on trust, and trust is really kind of the new currency that managers are going to have to use with their employees to trust that they're going to do the work, trust they're going to do it well, and giving the people the autonomy to be able to do that work, communicating with them without micromanaging them, to check in on them but not be checking up on them, and really investing in patience and flexibility. I think flexibility, trust, patience are really kind of the new normal and the new currency that we're going to be trading with our employees.
And I think that's a really good summary of what we learned. And I think what I'm excited about is, I think now that we've kind of summarized what the best practices are and the common challenges are, we can start looking at the analytics and KPIs and really get into, how are we going to monitor and measure this, which is why I'm excited to introduce today's guest. Cynthia Kyriazis is a productivity strategist and coach who has worked with a nationwide clientele that includes Fortune 500s, corporations, and small businesses since 1992 through her Kansas City-based company, Productivity Partners, Inc. She focuses on how to overcome productivity potholes and distractions that affect employee performance and growth. She is the author of the Amazon bestseller, Get Organized, Get Focused, Get Moving, and was named one of the top 28 best online productivity experts by best-selling author and columnist Hank Rearden. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, multiple newspapers, television, and radio. Good morning, Cynthia.
Good morning, Will. Happy to be here.
Yeah, glad you are here. As we've been kind of discussing this week, the challenges of working remotely, we'd really like to tap into your experience to discuss not only best practices, but also look at the analytics and KPIs we can use to monitor, measure, and improve remote workplace performance. So to get us started, in your experience, how well are organizations and leaders prepared to manage a remote workforce and monitor their performance?
Well, I think we're doing the same and perhaps some more things. We're just doing them differently. In a remote situation, it is really about providing structure, some autonomy, and some support. But in this case, it's providing a healthy dose of the support. Managers out there may be asking, well, how will I know that the staff is working? And if they can't answer that from a traditional perspective of how they've been managing, it can lead to micromanaging a workforce. And as Delise pointed out, trust is a really critical factor in any organization, but it's especially important when you're having and maintaining a successful remote workplace, because it's the case of integrating and incorporating work and life, and that can feel a little strained sometimes, a little, oh no, I'm not sure, that kind of thing.
That's a good point. And as we kind of look at this remote environment, how critical are the culture and values of an organization in driving remote workplace performance?
It's absolutely critical. It's the glue. These are especially important during times like this. But instead of talking the talk, we need to demonstrate it. I think in the interview that Delise did with Jim Urban, it was great because he said he asked someone weekly what they did to demonstrate their core value of esprit de corps or team spirit. It's a great question to ask somebody one-on-one. What have you done this week to try and strengthen us? So it's really a matter of trying to help them express how they've demonstrated that. How are our values being lived during this time? It's a powerful question, and it brings staff back to the why we're here.
Well, that's a really good point. And as you touched on Jim Urban's kind of emphasis on that, getting a little bit back into the metrics and the KPIs of, process and doing, what do you think are the most critical metrics or KPIs leaders should be evaluating when managing a remote workforce?
Okay, well, I'm going to take a step back and say, let's just go back to the basics I talked about in the beginning, that leaders need to provide for their teams structure, autonomy, and a good dose of support. So one of the ways to approach them is to ask, what is your goal for the week? What are your plans for achieving it? What help do you need? How can I, as a leader, support you in moving forward? Again, the staff is experiencing overwhelm and frustration themselves, and they're probably going to settle down as time goes along. But right now, the question is, how can I support you? Which is probably what the staff is doing with their organization's existing clients. You don't sell at a time like this. You ask, how can I support you? We need to get through the emotional part before we can start talking strategy. And again, it's just the first stage of this. So I would think a really good couple questions would be, what is your goal for the week, and how do you plan to achieve it, and what can I do to help?
When it comes to size of organizations, do you think there's an impact or an implication? Like, does the size of an organization matter? Like, should the approach or the theory be different for larger organizations or smaller organizations, or do you find it to be, kind of size agnostic?
Okay, well, we'll use your term size agnostic. I think they're basic fundamentals. If you, for example, let's say somebody commits to reaching out to 20 clients in a week. This may not be possible or even realistic during the first 2 weeks of a scramble like this. People are scrambling, they're adjusting, they're setting up the new norm. So they're dealing with their own anxiety, frustration, and let's face it, their own fear. So let's go back to the fundamentals. As things settle down and initial changes people were faced with begin to become handled, they become part of everyday expectations. For example, staff and families have begun to develop a rhythm and a routine around the situation, and this begins to mitigate some of the stress, which opens it up for having different and better conversations. And we'll use that same approach in getting ready to face new challenges that may be coming forward.
So as organizations begin to get through this mad scramble and get to a little bit of the norming, how would you go about, or how would you recommend organizations think about creating metrics that matter the most right now, or to define the metrics that matter the most right now to start tracking?
Okay, well, for me, this is a lot about the behaviors. Observation is one thing managers do. Right now, they don't necessarily have the ability to observe people other than in these remote situations. They can't walk down the hall, they can't see them in their office. So it's hard to observe others' behaviors around that. But as a leader, I think we need to be cognizant of how we're supporting the staff. And right now, how are we helping them be successful? So the hard question to ask yourself is, what have I observed? What have I heard? And how can I help them move forward?
So what do you think are the top 2 or 3 metrics organizations and their leadership should start tracking right now that you define that it needs to be more leadership focused? What do you think are the 2 or 3 metrics or 2 or 3 behaviors to use your language, they should be tracking and looking at right now to make an impact?
Well, remember, this is about providing a bit more autonomy, which can feel uncomfortable, but we can certainly ask these questions. In a virtual environment, you're asking questions in order to get buy-in and commitment. So you ask, are you asking for what goals they want to accomplish next week rather than telling them what goals to accomplish? An example would be, somebody has some questions around the fact that, look, I don't know when work ends. Is it 8 to 5? Is it 9 to 6? Is it to go till midnight? When does it happen? It's about giving them the autonomy to decide what kind of structure works for them. Another question might be, are managers adjusting to the new normal by providing more structure, more autonomy, and more support? So how are things getting done? It's a good time for leaders to ask themselves if I still have one foot in the directive approach or if I'm asking open-ended questions. How are you doing with that? So asking things like what is your plan for getting that done speaks to autonomy issues, right? And the third is our managers asking employees how they're demonstrating or living the organization's goal. That can be different for everyone. That can be more of a one-on-one conversation, because I think we do still need to have one-on-one conversations. And it speaks to supporting, and it speaks to the culture of the organization to bring forth this glue, these values. Are we demonstrating them? Are we working through them? Are we just talking about them?
Excellent insight, and very much appreciate that. As we come to a close, is there a final point or a best practice you'd like to leave us with?
Overall in my business, I see change in stages. There are stages to the change. I believe that we're in the very first stage. We don't know how long this stage is going to last, but strategically, we need to see how well we're doing at this stage. How well are we managing this stage? Because if we aren't handling the chaos now, when the next stage or the next level comes along, that chaos will follow us. And none of us can afford that from a business perspective or from a mental health perspective.
Really appreciate your insights into how organizations and leaders can begin to think about not only approaching this change, but defining the behaviors and then measuring those behaviors that allow them to take action and, as you say, kind of overcome the chaos.
Absolutely. As I say, onward.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for being here with us. We appreciate your insight and your wisdom. And we are approaching the end of today's segment. As always, we like to close with key takeaways and practices. I think the structural autonomy and a good dose of support is something that if we have that mantra in our minds to say, these are the things that we need to focus on. And that good dose of support, I guess, is where we get to the rubber meeting the runway. What's a good dose of support? What's too much? What's not enough? And I like when you said that we need to provide emotional support before strategy. And I think there's a lot of fear going on in our, what's our world going to look like? What is our work going to look like? What are our families going to look like? So I think us being able to quell that fear as leaders right now is a very important thing for us to do. I believe that routine mitigates stress, as you do, and that provides some predictability for employees, and that predictability starts to build trust. And so if we can be predictable in the way that we ask these questions, and you ask some really good questions that I like, that they're open-ended and they're not directive, but they allow the employee to feel like they have a voice, which gives them a little bit of power back. Things like, what goals do you plan to accomplish, rather than, this is the goal I want you to accomplish. So I think that if we can switch that narrative and allow for people to feel like they have some control, we'll start to build the trust and get our employees back to productivity, which is what we really want to do in the end. And that the first stage of change, I'm sure, kind of makes everybody a little bit nervous because we don't know what's to come. So given the fact that there are more questions than answers, I think our ability to be predictable and to provide a solid footing and foundation for our employees is the best thing we can do. So thank you so much for all of your insight and your help in helping us transition our employees into this new normal.
Thanks, Delise.
Yes, thank you again. Very much appreciate it, Cynthia. Please join us next week when we'll take a deeper dive into the analytics and metrics, particularly start to look at the measurements and some of the data that's starting to come back from the points that Cynthia raised. And we hope everybody has a great weekend.
Thank you. Stay safe, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.